All right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is United Nations Day. Happy United Nations Day, everyone. In his message, the Secretary General says that this organization was built by the world, for the world. In today's troubled world, he said, hope is not enough. Hope requires determined action and multilateral solutions for peace, shared prosperity, and a thriving planet. And it requires all countries working as one. On this day, he calls on all countries to keep this beacon for the world and its ideals shining. Earlier today, the Secretary General addressed the 16th BRICS summit held in Kazan in the Russian Federation. The Secretary General, in his remarks, said that he saluted the valuable commitment and support for international problem solving of the participants. He added that no single group and no single country can act alone or in isolation, and that it takes a community of nations working as one global family to address global challenges. He outlined the 4 areas where September's Summit of the Future offered a roadmap for strengthening multilateralism: finance, climate, technology, and of course, peace. He underscored the need for peace in Gaza, Lebanon, Sudan, and Ukraine. In relation to Ukraine, he reaffirmed his position and told the delegates that we need a just peace in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter, international law, and General Assembly resolutions. Everywhere, the Secretary General added, we must uphold the values of the UN Charter, the rule of law, and the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of all states. On the sidelines of the session, the Secretary General had a number of pull-aside conversations, including with the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the President of Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, and the Foreign Secretary of India, Vikram Misri, among others. He also had bilateral meetings with the President of Turkmenistan, Serdar Berdimuhamedov, and the President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. In a video message to the International Conference in support of Lebanon's people and sovereignty that took place in Paris today, the Secretary General underscored that an immediate ceasefire is needed now, along with meaningful steps towards full implementation of Security Council Resolutions 1559 and 1701. He expressed his grave concern about the safety and well-being of civilians on both sides of the Blue Line. He also urged friends of Lebanon to support the ongoing humanitarian response efforts. The Secretary General saluted the brave women and men of our peacekeeping force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, and the UN family across the country, who are striving to implement their mandates in such challenging conditions. We need a ceasefire in Lebanon, he said, as we need a ceasefire in Gaza and the immediate release of all hostages. For his part, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, said that a central element of our response must be to support efforts to end the violence. Mr. Lacroix told attendees of the conference that in order to advance the full implementation of Resolution 1701, the increased deployment of the Lebanese armed forces in southern Lebanon is essential to extend the authority of the state and bring about a political solution to the situation along the Blue Line. The Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Janine Hennis-Plaschert, told the conference that concrete action to end hostilities is needed. She stated that the humanitarian situation in Lebanon is already catastrophic. She reminded that the UN launched the $2.72 billion Lebanon Response Plan and the complementary $426 million flash appeal. Absent a ceasefire, however, humanitarian needs in Lebanon will only continue to grow. And at the conference, our humanitarian coordinator for Lebanon, Imran Riza, warned that the country risks falling off a humanitarian cliff as hostilities there persist. On the ground, intense strikes by the Israeli Defense Forces into Lebanon and by Hezbollah into Israel continued over the last 24 hours. The IDF struck various locations in the UNIFIL area of operations, as well as Beirut, Bekaa, and elsewhere. Hezbollah targeted numerous sites, including near Haifa and Tel Aviv. We note with concern that the Lebanese armed forces in Yatr bin Jubail suffered another 3 fatalities from Israeli strikes while attempting to evacuate wounded persons. And on the 23rd of October, Lebanon's Ministry of Public Health announced that at least 28 individuals were killed and 139 were injured in Israeli attacks across Lebanon in the preceding 24 hours. Again, we stress the need for all actors to immediately cease the violence. We also condemn the ever-increasing toll on civilians and civilian infrastructure and the loss of civilian lives. We remind all actors on the ground of their obligations under international law to respect and protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. And yesterday, one of our UN positions near Kfar Shuba was impacted by indirect fire of unknown origin. Fortunately, no injuries to peacekeepers were reported. We again remind the parties of their obligations to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and to respect the inviolability of UN premises at all times. On the humanitarian front, today, a humanitarian convoy supported by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reached Tyre in South Lebanon. The mission comprised 5 NGOs and delivered 14 trucks of aid, including food, mattresses, and other items. So far this month, the UN has sent assistance to people in hard-to-reach parts of Lebanon using 7 humanitarian convoys. For its part, the UN Population Fund continues to deliver services across Lebanon. However, due to the worsening security situation, some of the sites that UNFPA supports are no longer operational. This includes 6 out of the 16 primary healthcare centers that the agency supports, as well as one of 9 mobile units and 5 out of 17 safe spaces for women and girls. Turning to the situation in Gaza, OCHA reports that intense fighting continues to kill and injure civilians and damage civilian infrastructure in northern Gaza, especially in and around Jabalia. OCHA says the widespread devastation and deprivation brought on by the siege in North Gaza is indicative of a war being waged with little, if any, regard for the requirements of international law. OCHA has received reports that families in Tel al-Zatar, northeast of the Jabalia refugee camp, as well as west of the camp in Al-Fallujah, remain trapped and unable to move. Between 50,000 and 70,000 people are estimated to remain in Jabalia. Since the Israeli ground offensive in the north began on the 6th of October, some 63,000 people have been newly displaced from North Gaza Governorate to Gaza City. Palestinians in North Gaza also continue to flee the Beit Lahiya area, with reports of people there moving westward through Jaffa Street. However, many residents remain in their homes amid heavy bombardment. The Palestinian Civil Defense says its operations have completely stopped in North Gaza Governorate, leaving the entire population there without humanitarian rescue services. The Civil Defense reports that several of its staff members were either injured or detained by Israeli forces. Meanwhile, the only firefighting truck in the north reportedly caught fire after it was shelled. OCHA stresses yet again that parties to the conflict must protect civilians, including humanitarian personnel and first responders. The vital work that they do must be facilitated, not targeted. This morning, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, briefed Security Council members on the topic of women, peace, and security. She said that while every year the global community reaffirms its commitment to ensuring women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in conflict prevention, resolution, and recovery, progress still remains dishearteningly slow. Peace and security decision-making is overwhelmingly dominated by men, and ending impunity for atrocities against women and girls is still but a distant goal. Ms. Mohammed said that the past year has been especially difficult in Gaza, where tens of thousands of Palestinian women and girls have been killed and injured amid continuing war and a terrible humanitarian crisis. She reiterated the Secretary General's call to protect civilians, civilian infrastructure, and to uphold international law. The Executive Director of UN Women, Sima Bahous, also briefed council members and said that women are frustrated by the meetings they are invited to in the margins of actual decision-making, the many consultations with no outcome, the strategies with no funding. They're calling for action, she said, by pursuing accountability for gross violations of women's rights, by removing discriminatory laws, by making policy commitments with a target and a deadline. Those remarks are online. On the margins of the Security Council's open debate, the Department of Peace Operations held an event yesterday entitled Advancing Women, Peace and Security in UN Peacekeeping, Lessons from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Speakers discussed lessons on the effectiveness of peace operations, particularly our mission in the DRC, MONUSCO, in implementing the Women, Peace and Security mandate in the country. The mission was key in advancing the mandate, particularly in protecting women and promoting their participation in peace and political processes, including elections. However, participants recognized that the Women, Peace and Security mandate will not implement itself. It will be realized through political leadership, shared commitment, and sustained funding. That event is available on Web TV, and if you need more information, please reach out to our peacekeeping colleagues. And just for the record, you saw that yesterday afternoon, the Security Council held a meeting on Syria. Our special envoy for Syria, Garrett Peterson, said that the conflict is raging in Gaza and Lebanon, but the heat is felt in Syria too. He reminded council members of the importance of the presence of the UN Disengagement Observer Force, known as UNDOF. He also spoke about the need for constructive international diplomacy in support of a UN-facilitated intra-Syrian process to advance Security Council Resolution 2254. For her part, Edem Wasurnu, the Director of Operations and Advocacy at OCHA, said that more than 16.7 million people in Syria need aid, and more than 7 million are internally displaced. Women and girls continue to bear a disproportionate burden. And as ongoing hostilities in Lebanon displace more people across the border into Syria, the Acting Emergency Relief Coordinator, Joyce Msuya, has allocated an additional $4 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund for urgent relief efforts. This brings the total amount allocated to support new arrivals from Lebanon and Syria to $12 million. This funding will allow the UN Refugee Agency, the World Food Programme, UNFPA, and UNICEF to provide emergency support, including food, nutrition, and shelter. Meanwhile, the resident and humanitarian coordinator in Syria, Adam Abdulmullah, is warning about the impact of an airstrike earlier this week on the main road at the Masna border crossing between Lebanon and Syria, the second such strike in less than 3 weeks. In a statement, he said that the attack has rendered this vital route impassable. The crossing is the main pathway for people escaping the escalating hostilities in Lebanon into Syria. Parents are now having to carry their children and belongings as they navigate their way between two huge craters in the road. Turning to Sudan, the World Food Programme has brought in food assistance for 360,000 people in Darfur across the Adre border since it reopened in August. Distributions have been completed for over 200,000 people in Kerenek and Sirba, areas at risk of famine in West Darfur. Also, WFP is scaling up its efforts to reach 180,000 people in Zamzam, located near El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, with monthly food packages. Of this, so far, nearly 70,000 people have received assistance. Additional WFP assistance is on the way. According to the food agency, early indications show little improvement in food security, as historic flooding across Sudan destroyed crops and ongoing conflict made it difficult for farmers to plant, cultivate, and now to harvest. WFP has assisted over 6 million people this year, but this is still a drop in the ocean compared to the needs. In September, WFP supported the highest number of people in the greater area of Khartoum since the start of the conflict, reaching over 500,000 vulnerable individuals. Our colleagues in the peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic report that they continue to support the voluntary disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of combatants across the country. Recently, peacekeepers assisted in the demobilization and reintegration of 74 former combatants in the towns of Bria, Bangassou, and Kouango. The mission is also responsible for the storage of weapons of war collected at the site of operations and transported to Bangui, where they're checked and marked by MINUSCA for subsequent handover to the relevant ministries for appropriate use. Turning to the Philippines, where tropical cyclone Trami, which made landfall earlier today, has resulted in widespread flooding and landslides across the country. We're working with the government, which is leading the response, by providing supplies already in the country, such as hygiene and dignity kits. The World Food Programme is coordinating with the government to deploy mobile storage units, while the Food and Agriculture Organization is working to support farmers affected by the cyclone. According to authorities, there have been 10 deaths, with more than 2.6 million people having been affected across 14 of the country's 18 regions. Provinces in the south of the largest island of Luzon have been most affected, with floods and landslides damaging roads, bridges, and power lines, leaving communities isolated. Hundreds of families have been displaced. This morning, the UN Environment Programme released its annual emissions gap report. This year's report is entitled "No More Hot Air, Please," and said that nations must deliver dramatically stronger ambition and action in the next round of nationally determined contributions, or the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees Celsius goal will be gone within a few years. In a video message for the report launch, the Secretary General said that we are teetering on a planetary tightrope. Either leaders bridge the emissions gap, or we plunge headlong into climate disaster, with the poorest and most vulnerable suffering the most, he said. This report shows that annual greenhouse gas emissions are at an all-time high, rising 1.3% last year. However, they must fall 9% each year to 2030 to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and avoid the very worst of climate change. The report and the video message are both online. Today, Disarmament Week starts. It seeks to promote awareness and better understanding of disarmament issues and their cross-cutting importance. Global Media and Information Literacy Week also starts today under the theme, The New Digital Frontiers of Information, Media and Information Literacy for Public Interest Information. It will underscore the importance of keeping pace with the rapidly evolving digital landscape. And today is World Development Information Day. This day was established to draw the attention of the world to development problems and the need to strengthen international cooperation to solve them. And we have a few briefings to tell you about tomorrow. Starting at 11 a.m., there will be a briefing here by Celia Ballier, the independent expert on human rights and international solidarity. Then at noon, we will be joined virtually by our guests, Juan Jacaria, WFP's representative and country director in Haiti, and Lola Castro, WFP's regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean. They will connect from Haiti and Panama respectively and will brief on Haiti. And at 1 p.m., there will be a briefing by Tlaleng Mokofeng, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health. And finally, at 1:30 p.m., there will be a briefing by Alice Jill Edwards, the Special Rapporteur on torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment and punishment. And finally, after a long, dry spell, I'm delighted to welcome a full payment to the UN's regular budget, this time from Haiti. We thank our friends in Port-au-Prince. Merci en pile. Okay, yes, Gabriel.
Thank you, Farhan. Did I miss it, or did you mention an UNRWA staff member that was killed yesterday?
I can confirm, yes. I can confirm that a member of the UN Relief and Works Agency, one of the drivers, was killed when his vehicle had been shot at by the IDF, yes.
And the vehicle was a UN-marked vehicle, yes or no?
This was a UN-marked vehicle, yes.
Farhan, why don't we mention this anymore? Have we become so numb to the fact that Israel is killing UN personnel and there are now 233 that are dead that we don't even mention it anymore?
Unfortunately, I did neglect to add this amid the other notices that we've had, but the sad truth is that there's so much devastation to report that as you see, I've just gone over about 20 minutes worth of stuff without even getting to that part. Yes, yes, you and first, and then Abdul Hamid after.
Thank you, Farhan. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, this morning said that the Turkish airstrikes in northeast Syria killed 12 civilians, including 2 children, and wounded 25 people, also destroyed some civilian infrastructure. Does Secretary General condemn this attack?
We condemn all attacks with civilian casualties, and we want to make sure that any such actions are halted.
And the second question, according to some news stories, a new peace negotiation and peace process has started between Turkish government and the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK. The question is the UN is actively monitoring this internal dialogue in Turkey?
I have no information to report on this at this stage. Yes, Abdul Hamid and then Amli.
Thank you, Farhan. Follow up on the numbness regarding Palestinian casualties. 820 Palestinians were killed since the invasion of the latest invasion of Jabalia refugee camp and Beit Lahia. None of these casualties had been mentioned in the Note briefing. 820.
No, I actually did mention the attack at the Jabalia refugee camp at the start of the briefing before you had come in. So I did mention that has been going on. And we've been talking in recent days about the killings and displacements from Jabalia.
Yeah. The second, Israeli put the names of 4 Al Jazeera correspondents, accusing them of being members of Hamas, which is that an introductory remarks to kill them. Are you aware of that?
We stand against any efforts to harm or to threaten journalists. Yes, Edie. Oh, sorry, Amelie and then Edie.
Thanks, Farhan. Can you give a little bit more details about the context of the death of the UNRWA member?
Yes, hold on one second, I can. Hold on, I'm just finding my colleague's note. Sorry, I've lost the place where I had the details here. But yes, he was it's an UNRWA driver who I believe was killed along with his brother in an UNRWA vehicle yesterday. It was shot at by the IDF.
And sorry, I have another question. Regarding the BRICS summit, you mentioned a lot of bilaterals. You didn't mention the one with Vladimir Putin. Is it still planned, considering the time difference?
Yes, it's still planned. It hasn't happened so far, but we expect it in the coming hours, and we'll try to get you the details once it's happened. Yes, Edie.
A follow-up on that. Are we going to be getting readouts on the Secretary General's meetings? And is he planning to meet China's President Xi Jinping?
I don't have anything about a meeting with the Chinese president at this point to confirm. I do believe we will be getting a readout of the meeting with President Putin after that has happened.
And are we going to get a briefing from the UNIFIL spokesman at some point?
Yes, you will. Unfortunately, my colleague Andrea Tenenti had taken ill. He's been under the weather, but we're trying to get him now for early next week. Yes, Maggie.
Thanks,
and then
Farhan.
Volodymyr.
Thanks, Farhan. I just wanted to ask a follow-up on Lebanon. There's been a lot of bombing around the southern city of Tyre. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I haven't seen any statement until I looked as we started this briefing. There's still nothing on the UNESCO website, maybe warning parties against hitting cultural heritage sites. Baalbek is also a World Heritage Site in the Bekaa Valley where there's a lot of bombing going on. Has there been no warning from UNESCO to the parties?
I believe UNESCO will be warning the parties, but certainly it's very concerned, given the status of Tyre as a World Heritage Site, that the historic parts of the city be protected from any combat.
And then a separate question on Mozambique. The ruling party candidate has declared victory, Daniel Chapo, but the second runner-up has said, called for nationwide protests today and tomorrow. I know you guys put out a statement Sunday, but do you have anything further to say on the Mozambique elections?
Well, the simple point is we remain concerned, as we expressed in our statement on Sunday, about the conditions during the election period. And certainly we hope that that all peaceful protest is allowed to proceed without any harassment. Volodymyr.
Thank you, Farhan. Secretary General mentioned Ukraine in his speech in Kazan, but is he going to call on Putin to stop Russian aggression against Ukraine? And there's another question. What made Mr. Guterres celebrate UN Day in the company of war criminal Putin?
Happy birthday.
In this case, of course, the dates of the BRICS summit are exactly what they are, and he has chosen, as he does, to attend the BRICS summit. You'll have seen what he said in the BRICS summit, including what he said about Ukraine, and those are the views that he has held for quite some time about the need for the UN Charter, the international humanitarian law, and UN resolutions to be respected. And he will make that point clear in his meetings as well. And you'll be getting a readout of that. Yes, Richard.
Thank you, Farhan. Two questions. Number one, how many times has the Secretary General met with President Putin since the Ukraine war started?
He met with him last in 2022 when he had visited both Kiev and Moscow. As you know, he had been talking to the leaders of both countries, including about the Black Sea grain initiative.
And then on another question, and CNN's Clarissa Ward and a small team were detained by one of the sides in Sudan the other day. Are you aware of that? They were then let go with some smiles and photos taken, but it was a pretty tense situation. Do you have any information or comment on that? Thank you.
Well, again, as I told one of your colleagues a few minutes ago in a different context, we're against the harassment of any journalist, and no one who is covering any of these situations anywhere in the world should be subjected to any sort of threatening behavior. And by the way, nice to see your brother beside you.
I didn't know that was him.
Well, look to your right then. Stefano.
Thank you, Farhan. It's a follow-up on Secretary General in Russia. The Italian Foreign Minister Tajani just today, during a press conference at the end of the G7, he was asked what he thought about the Secretary General being in Russia. His answer was, he should have done this before, means that the UN should have acted before even the invasion acted, and he basically criticizing the UN because he didn't act enough on the beginning of the crisis. He should have done more. And so now the Italian Foreign Minister, again, Italy is at the presidency of the G7, says, so it's a positive thing that he's now looking finally for a mediation. What is your reaction? What is the Secretary General to this critique?
All I can tell you is that you're well aware of the positions the Secretary General has taken, and he was dealing with the crisis in Ukraine from the very start. As Richard just asked about his visit to Moscow, and he was there and in Kiev in 2022, dealing with efforts on particular steps, such as the Black Sea Initiative, to help deal with the situation between the countries. And so he's been involved however circumstances allow. Yes, Abdelhamid.
First, Farhan, tomorrow there is a major event, and I expected you to announce it, about celebration the 60th anniversary of the Group of 77. A major development, major event like that, it would have been wise if you announce it in advance so journalists will be aware of it. Right?
Well, I mean, we'll mention these. We mentioned these events on the days themselves, but thank you for giving a heads up.
Okay.
By the way, because of your colleague's question, I finally have the details on the staff member killed yesterday. So, Amelie, what I can say is that on the 23rd of October at 7:38 hours local time, an UNRWA pickup vehicle was hit by the Israeli Air Force in Deir al-Bala. The strike resulted in 2 fatalities. One of them was an UNRWA driver. 3 passersby were also reported with minor injuries. Yes, I believe so.
I have another question.
So. That was. Yes.
There are tens of thousands still trapped in Jabalia refugee camp and Beit Lahia. They cannot leave, and they cannot, if they continue like that, they will not survive. Is there any doubt now that Israel is going after the Palestinian people to annihilate them completely from Gaza Strip, or not?
We've been very clear in recent days about the need for the population of Jabalia to be able to move freely and to leave the camp for other safer areas if they so choose. Ephraim.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up on what's happening in Jabalia. We're also seeing videos of children with their mothers in the hundreds surrounded by tanks. We saw how they have been separated from the men as well. We have seen pictures of men that's reminding many in the world of Auschwitz and Dachau. We're seeing a lot of heavy pictures, and what these people are going through is hard to wrap your mind around it. What is the UN's message to the people in the north of Gaza on this UN Day? What is your message to them? What should they do?
Our message to them is that we are pleading for them. We're trying to make sure that the world hears them and is aware of their needs, and we will keep pushing. They are human beings who have the same rights as anyone else, and they need to be protected, and we will do our utmost to protect them. I might add, by the way, that among the people who have been trapped in Gaza over this past year are our own personnel, our own staff. We've lost more than 230 of our own Palestinian staff in Gaza. So the pressures that other people are facing, including hunger, including displacement, including being killed and being bombed, are those that our own personnel have faced. Yes?
So it's Eric with Kyoto. I have a follow-up to your answers over the past few days on DPRK.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the position of the SG on the potential deployment of any member states' troops to assist the Russian invasion?
As I've told your colleagues in recent days, any violations of the sanctions regime concerning the Democratic People's Republic of Korea needs to be examined and responded to by the Security Council's Sanctions Committee. So that the matter is in their hands.
But not on the sanctions, on the potential deployment to assist an invasion of another member state.
We are opposed to the further militarization of the conflict in Ukraine by any side. Yes, Iftikhar.
Thank you, Farhan. There are reports, press reports, that Qatar is reactivating the process for ceasefire in Gaza. Does the United Nations have any information about this?
We continue to support all efforts to get a ceasefire in Gaza, and we hope that they will ultimately lead to an actual ceasefire. Have a good afternoon, everyone.